How does the pizza app calculate amounts and temperatures for Poolish-based dough? What is Poolish? And most importantly, how do you make Poolish dough with the pizza app? Let's find out together. Welcome back. In today's episode, I'll bake a simple recipe with Poolish and explain the basics along the way. What is Poolish? The pizza app's glossary explains it quite well. Poolish is a liquid pre-ferment with a 1-to-1 ratio of flour to water, plus a small amount of yeast. It's typically fermented at 18 to 20 degrees Celsius and is known to enhance dough extensibility. Now that we know what it is, let's configure the app. Go to Settings and activate Poolish. You'll see an adjustment bar for the percentage of Poolish and the leavening schedule. At the current room temperature setting, the app shows that the dough would over-leaven. To fix this, we'll use the fridge for cold proofing, so activate the cold leavening CT option inside Settings. For this recipe, I'm using 30% Poolish, fermented overnight. To make the steps easier to follow, I've put together this simple Excel table, and I configured the pizza app accordingly. I want 3 small pizzas with 65% hydration and 3% salt. The Poolish will ferment at room temperature for 14 hours, and the main dough for 3 hours, then it'll go to the fridge for 27. For the Poolish, I measure out 110 grams of room temperature water, 110 grams of flour, 0.1 grams of active dry yeast. Mix these ingredients in a bowl until combined. Cover the bowl and let it ferment overnight at room temperature. Since this is just a pre-dough, there's no need for cold water or heavy mixing. If you plan to ferment the Poolish for longer than 12 hours, use a stronger flour like Caputo Nuvola Super or any flour with a W rating above 300. After pre-making and adding the Poolish to the main dough, the rest of the process is the same as the cold fermented dough recipe from my last video. If you haven't seen it yet, make sure to check it out. For the main dough, I measure out 128 grams of icy water, 256 grams of flour, 11 grams of salt, 0.5 grams of dry yeast. First, pour the cold water into a bowl and add the pre-made Poolish from last night. Dissolve it in the water until it has a milky texture. Then, add the flour and yeast. Mix the dough until it reaches 21 to 22 degrees Celsius. Then add the salt and a bit of olive oil. Finish mixing when the dough hits 23 to 24 degrees Celsius. While I prepare the dough, let's talk a bit about Poolish. Is Poolish basically a mother dough? Not quite. Poolish is a one-time pre-ferment prepared for a specific batch of dough. It has high hydration, a 1-to-1 ratio of water to flour, and uses a precise small amount of yeast. Fermentation is carefully controlled to achieve the desired level of yeast activity, typically over 12 to 24 hours. Mother dough, or sourdough starter, is a reusable culture of wild yeast and bacteria maintained through regular feeding. Its yeast activity depends on feeding schedules and conditions, making it less precise but ideal for long-term use. So, Poolish won't turn your pizza into sourdough. While it may add a subtle sour note, its primary purpose is to create more volume and airy pockets in the dough, giving you a lighter crust without using much yeast. Poolish is believed to have originated in Poland, hence the name, and became popular in France in the 19th century. In recent years, modern pizza makers have started experimenting with Poolish, primarily to enhance dough extensibility and hydration, resulting in a lighter, airier crumb and beautifully leoparded crust. Additionally, it can add subtle sour or tangy flavor notes. Authentic Neapolitan pizza dough, as defined by the Associazione Verace Pizza Napoletana, AVPN, is made with a simple combination of flour, water, salt, and yeast, without pre-ferments. This dough is traditionally proofed at room temperature for 8 to 24 hours. After mixing the Poolish with the main dough, the incorporation was surprisingly easy. The dough handled beautifully, and with less kneading, I achieved a smooth texture much quicker than in my previous recipes. Finish kneading the dough at 23 degrees Celsius and let it rest for 20 minutes. After that, I gave it a stretch and fold. During the lamination, everything went smoothly, followed by another 20-minute rest. Even with the hydration raised to 65%, the dough remained surprisingly easy to handle. However, balling was slightly more challenging. The dough was a bit sticky, so I had to oil up my hands and work quickly to get nice, tight dough balls. After balling, I kept them at room temperature for 2 hours to allow the yeast to kick in. Then, the dough container went into the fridge until the next day. The dough has rested, and everything is ready. Toppings prepared, oven preheated. I took the tray out of the fridge 2 hours earlier, and the dough balls look fantastic, tight, fluffy, and perfectly fermented. Now it's time to stretch the dough and form the pizza bases. Forming the base was really easy. The dough was smooth, handled nicely, and stretched beautifully without tearing. It didn't over-ferment, so it stayed strong enough to stretch while keeping its shape. Now let's look at the results. The crust rose up easily and became airy but also well-baked, even with very little yeast used. This really shows how Poolish helps to hand-mix higher hydration dough, resulting in a soft, airy, Neapolitan-like pizza. The bottom crisped up nicely, and the cornicione, while crispy, wasn't as crunchy as a 24-hour dough, but that's to be expected. What really stood out was the texture. The baked pizza dough was incredibly soft and a lot less chewy compared to, say, the 48-hour dough from the last video. Flavor-wise, we didn't notice a huge difference, but the way the dough rose and baked really improved. No wonder people use Poolish dough for pizzas like Canotto style. It's definitely worth more experimenting, even though Poolish adds an extra step to the dough-making process. Try it out and let me know what you think in the comments. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more pizza experiments. See you in the next video.